Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm sure that I speak for all of the alums out there when I say I wish we could be saying welcome back to Hanover. Instead, at least I get the advantage of saying welcome to everyone from all around the world. So I should probably say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We've got a really exciting panel here today. This conference is all about investing in our energy future, but right now we're going to try to get a little bit more specific and dive into the innovation in the new economy, the new energy economy. For the last couple of decades, I think we've seen a pretty extraordinary transformation taking hold of our energy economy. But in many ways, and I think a lot of the excitement about the space and the Institute and other things are proving that we're only just getting started. So I'm going to do some quick introductions here across the team that we have assembled, and then we're going to dive right in. It's a large group, and I really want to get to the meat of the matter around innovation in the new energy economy. I'm Andrew Beebe. I'm going to play the role of moderator. I'm a class of 1993, and I was an entrepreneur for 20 years, first in the internet, early days of the internet, as digitization was really taking over the world economy, the world stage, and the way we work at home. And then in the energy economy, in the new energy economy, as solar and distributed generation and electric vehicles and other things were starting to take over a lot of those same platforms of business and the way that we work and live. And now I'm an investor at Obvious Ventures, where we focus on backing purpose-driven entrepreneurs, reimagining some of those trillion-dollar industries. And I'm joined on this panel with an extraordinary group of folks who span both the generations of Dartmouth, but also different categories, massive sectors within the energy economy. Stina Brock is a class of 01 and Tuck 02, who's now the VP of Business Development in Proterra. Scott Jacobs is a class of 99, the co-founder of Generate Capital, amongst many other accolades within the energy world. Catherine Stempien, class of 90, is the Avangrid president and CEO of Avangrid Networks. And then Ian Whitcomb, not a class of Dartmouth as a graduate, but assures me, in fact, I think he's probably spent more time on the Dartmouth campus than many of us over the last few years, is the president of Irving Oil. So we're gonna set some ground rules here for the conversation, and then we're just gonna dive right in. There's probably some definitions around what is new energy and what is innovation. And I'm going to leave that up to the panelists to share as they dig in to how they see it, because there can be innovation in technology, there can be innovation in finance, and there can be innovation in policy, of course. We're going to dig into a bunch of complex topics. I'm going to call on each of the panelists to answer those just because we're in a Zoom world these days, and I hope we can precipitate some real conversation. And then I'd like to ask the participants to get your questions ready. As you think about questions that you'd like to ask everyone at the end, we're going to try to leave plenty of room there. And then we're going to have a lightning round conversation around key technologies that we think might be transformational in the decade to come. And then we'll jump to your questions. So have those ready. You can put them, I think, in the chat. We'll be able to read and filter through some of those. So let's get after it. As I said, there was this 30-year period, I think, after I graduated in the early 90s, focused on a digital transformation of our economies in so many ways. And it's still going on today. It was actually fits and starts in the early days. In the early days of the internet, we weren't sure why we were doing these cool things with HTML and web pages, but we knew something exciting was happening. And now it's transforming every corner of the world. I think in the early days of early 2000s, we saw the energy transformation starting to take shape. We saw it with activism, we saw it with politics, but then, and things like Al Gore's movie and other things really catalyzed a global conversation. And we're in the early innings of that decarbonization of our global ecosystem of business in every corner of energy, but also mobility, even food, construction, et cetera. So those are big, big topics that we're going to try and dig into, and I'm going to frame them in past, present, and future. Looking a little bit at the history, because we've got people who have been at this a while and companies that have been in it for a really long time. And then what's happening today in the moment where we're all still working, and then some ideas about what's going to happen next. Ian, I'm going to turn to you first. If you could just share with us Irving Oil's journey over the last 100 years around energy innovation. I know a lot of that had to do with oil refineries and marketing, but what has it become in the last 50 years as we've started to see the transformation take shape?
Thank you very much, Andrew. And it's really great to be here this afternoon, as you said, this evening and this morning, maybe for those that it's relevant to. It's very interesting when you look at the issues that we're talking about today from the perspective of a company that's been in existence for almost 100 years. Our company started in 1924, and it has seen many, many changes across the whole spectrum of energy since that time. Most recently, as we've been thinking about the company, we've been thinking about the company from the perspective of redefining the markets that we trade in, redefining how we do our business internally, and the products and the customers that we serve. And all of those things are actually really common themes that every organization has to look at over time in order to stay relevant to the time and evolve over time. So those things for us are grounded in our values, and they are consistent over time. Safety, the value of our people and our communities, the value of the environment, and the teamwork of how we all work together. And all of those things today, and I'll just maybe close a little bit this way on this topic, Andrew. We would think in North America that we have within the refining segment some of the best performing refiners from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective anywhere in the world. We sort of have that pride of place. But the reality is in Canada, only 8% of our refineries actually are within the top 25% of greenhouse gas emitters. And Irving Oil is proudly in that place. But we're proudly in that place really because of the values that I just spoke to. And as time goes on, as we evolve and more opportunities come, and certainly change comes, we're going to have to stay grounded in those things to continue to be at the forefront of an evolving energy market.
Thank you. I've known Stina for a while and seen her through a clean tech journey of the early days of clean tech 1.0. And so it's a nice contrast to a 100-year-old company. You've been in some 0-year-old companies and seen real transformation over the last decade in clean tech. Maybe I could just start with a little bit about what that journey has looked like for you, but also any big surprises that you've witnessed or things that were unexpected in terms of the evolution of the energy economy in the last decade.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So after Dartmouth, so I actually was a Thayer 02, so I did engineering. And after Dartmouth, I went to grad school at the University of Washington. And I did research on power electronics controls and control strategies for renewables plus storage and power systems. And so, I was really interested in renewables. I was really interested in hydrogen. I thought for sure that was going to happen pretty quick. So that one has been one that hasn't turned out the way I originally thought. Although now maybe we're in the decade of hydrogen, we'll see. So I mean, I think I'm surprised about things like, people will let strangers pick them up in their cars and drive them places like Uber, for example, or, that plant-based meat is like mainstream now. But the fact that storage and solar are, widespread on the grid at this point, that's like what I've been working on for 20 years at this point. So I feel glad that we're getting there. I'm surprised it hasn't been faster, I'll say. But having come at it from the tech side, I think what I've realized over the years is how important the financial and policy pieces are to actually bringing tech forward. So that's been a lesson learned. And I also think consumer adoption has been really interesting, like how much that, engaging with consumers, again, can really drive change in the energy industry.
Thanks. Scott, let's go to finance, because when you and Jigger were starting Generate Capital and I was in the solar industry, you guys said, we're going to do this crazy thing. We're going to take all these risky assets and finance them. And I said, why would you possibly do that? They said, because they're just not that risky. Everybody's got it wrong. And there's a huge opportunity there. The company has done incredibly well on that bet over the last, I think, decade. So maybe you could share a little bit about the innovation that's taken place that Stina was referring to on the finance side, because so much of that has been maybe a silent catalyst in all of these technology rollouts.
Yeah, you saw it firsthand, obviously, in the solar industry, even before we got started, Andrew, at Generate. And we learned from that experience, which, Jigger, who everyone has heard from today, really catalyzed in the early 2000s with the founding of SunEdison, and the change from a technology product sale to an infrastructure project driven service, which is what energy and resources need to be for consumers to adopt, right? At the end of the day, every consumer right now has access to energy in the developed world, and they have access to electricity in a way that they pay as they use it. So if you try and sell technology to that customer, Staples in the early days of SunEdison for Jigger, and you say, I would like you to pay me $20 worth of utility bills up front, and it will pay off over time in about year 16. And those electrons will be green, so you'll feel better about yourself. That's not a very compelling value proposition, especially because you're a startup technology company trying to sell something that someone depends on every minute of every single day, and it has to be there for them to even continue as consumers or as businesses to do what they expect. So you have to bring reliability to the forefront, but you also have to bring this notion of a service. And what we said at Generate is, gosh, there are a lot of these technologies that, like solar, which was 50 years old when that transition from a technology product to an infrastructure project took place, it wasn't a financial innovation so much as it was a business model innovation, right? But you need money to do it. You also need people to do it. You need the ability to operate these projects so that customers actually get what you promise them over those 20, 30, 40 years. So what Generate really did is we said, gosh, there are dozens, maybe hundreds of these technology projects or products, that people would say are risky, but they're not. And we started with things like battery storage that Wells Fargo would have said, oh my gosh, that is way too scary for us to finance. And we said, well, you've had it next to your brain and on top of your private parts for the last 15 years. And you think in the basement of a building with a bunch of technology wrapping it and a lot of heating and cooling infrastructure, that's somehow scary. They still said, yes, that's still somehow scary for them, right? So we did things like battery storage. We did things like food waste digesters before anyone thought about food waste even as a climate problem. And we know it's a huge climate problem. And our generation of food waste is obviously a big thing we need to address as an economy. But these are also food waste digesters. They look like beer breweries. You just put a bunch of food waste into a big tank and there are some bacteria that eat it and they poop out gas. And that gas is something we can use, whether it's for a pipeline or for a turbine. And that's biogas. It's a lot better than taking it out of the ground from fossil fuel sources. So there are lots of these technologies out there, and a lot of them are really well proven. They just hadn't been backed by money and people who knew how to deliver to customers that reliable, affordable, and sustainable resource that those customers wanted.
And give us a sense of today, what is the scale of Generate in terms of a measure of what you're financing dollar amount?
So we've done 2,000 assets over the last 7.5 years. We now own and operate over 2,000 assets, serving more than 1,000 customers in North America. We expanded to Europe. We've raised billions and billions of dollars to build infrastructure. And importantly, another thing that I think gets lost in some of these discussions is we make more money than conventional energy, a lot more money, because we serve customers better than conventional resources do. We broke the problem down and said, what do customers want? They want affordable, reliable, sustainable resources. And it's not an invention that they want. It's infrastructure and services that they want. And it's amazing. The demand is outstripping the supply. We've put $500 or so billion dollars a year for the last 10 years into renewable energy as a globe, as an economy. And that sounds like a big number, but there's going to be $29 trillion this decade alone invested in sustainability, energy, and other things. But 29 trillion puts that, few billion of the last decade into perspective and shows us what this decade is really going to be about.
Okay, Catherine, let's talk about 29 trillion. Avangrid Networks, I mean, if I did my research correctly, you own some utilities that serve over 3 million customers. I am one of those customers in Central Maine Power. And I'm very happy customer. It's a tough job out there. The weather's pretty rough. We're at the end of a line and we get regular outages, but the guys are out there fixing it. So thank you for that. You've also had some experience in Florida, another tough environment that has gone through a lot of hardening. I used to work at NextEra, and we spent a lot of time building out a more resilient setup for the future, and also a substantial transition to renewables. But we've had distributed represented, we've had oil represented. Now to hear from the electricity world, what are the big technologies that you're focused on? And maybe to get to Scott's part of the world, how do you think about financing those, previously risky assets like rooftop solar or distributed storage and the like?
Thanks, Andrew. And this has been such a fascinating conversation, even for me, just to listen in on. So starting off, Ian's company's young to me. Central Maine Power started in the late 1800s. So my companies are over 120 years old, and started as vertically integrated utilities in Maine, New York, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. We own electric and gas utilities. And we are also in the process of a merger of acquiring Public Service of New Mexico, which will add New Mexico and some of Texas into our service territories. And my company is also the third largest generator of renewable power in the United States as well. And we've been on quite a journey, right? I think sometimes people are thinking this is a panel about innovation and you've got somebody representing the utility industry on it. Like, how does that fit together? And I think that, I will accept the criticism that can sometimes be lobbed towards utilities about not being the most cutting edge. I think that that's a title we earned in the history is no longer true. But I think the history of it is in part because of our obligation to serve every one of our customers in our service territory, rich, medium, or poor. And so one of our primary goals in setting up our system is to have a least cost system. And that drove us for many, many years to conventional fossil fuel generation and to building a grid that was a very much of a one-way grid where central Maine generation stations are feeding out electricity into users. And of course, we've seen a tremendous amount of change over the last couple of decades where we have really had to remake our business and rethink, it's just Scott's point, customer service. And Ian talked a little bit about that culture and what it is and who we are and what we're doing. And thinking about the future in terms of building a more resilient network, right? You talked about resiliency down in Florida. We know because of climate change, storms are getting more frequent and they're getting stronger. And we also know that customers are expecting us to do a better job for cheaper in restoring. People don't like to go without power. My parents will talk about the days where they would just turn their fireplace. They would put logs on the fireplace and go 3 weeks without power. Customers aren't willing to do that anymore. We've got to be able to move more quickly and to get their power back up and running. And then we've got to adapt to new technologies. And I think, as you've already heard, some of the solar technologies, the distributed generation, whether it's rooftop rooftop solar or batteries. Now, first of all, I'm one of the more gray-haired people on this panel. So I remember when rooftop solar in the 70s was going to be the next thing. And it didn't quite make it then, but certainly technology changes. You hit that technology innovation path where really the cost structure went down with a combination of policy incentives, whereby now you're getting people generating power on the rooftops and sending power back on the grid. Well, remember, our grid was not built to take power back. It was only built to push power out. So from a technology perspective, we've had to completely rethink the way that we provide power and our grid. But I think that the technology is going to continue to change. We're going to continue to see lower cost new technologies out there, whether it be solar, wind power. My company will actually be the first company to build, construct, and operate offshore wind off the coast of Massachusetts with Vineyard Wind. So we're seeing offshore wind come. We're seeing hydrogen as a new technology. We've done biomass, all kinds of new technologies, and then batteries, of course, and how to integrate those into the grid. But again, I'll emphasize, for us, it's about making it affordable for all of our customers, not just the ones who can afford it.
Got it. Let's move into the present a little bit. Ian, maybe you could share with us, this last year was interesting because we saw a lot less car travel, we saw a lot less air travel, and there was a real dip in terms of oil demand and behavior of usage around the planet, and a somewhat unscheduled event, but it's a great sort of forecast of coming attractions, possibly. So how were you able to use the last year to think through the future? And am I even getting that right from your perspective? Do you see a world where oil demand is going to shift substantially? And then if so, what technologies are you all going to invest in to help, change, work in that new landscape?
Thanks, Andrew. It's interesting over the last year, and we've all experienced it together, where there were no airplanes flying, there were very few cars on the road, and everything was really shut down for months, if not most of the full year. And in that year, 2020, the world's demand for oil, just to call it out, went from about 98 million barrels a day down to about 90 million barrels a day. So there was a decline of about 9% last year in the overall world demand for oil products. And I think that's quite amazing. Something as big as a global pandemic would have an impact of only 9% in terms of the demand for that product. And it was terribly interesting to watch as that was unfolding. First of all, how different governments responded to protect their local economies. And we think about this world that we live in, and we think about it from the perspective of it's a global world and we're all doing the right things for mankind. But the reality of 2020 was, once there was a shock to the system, not only did companies start to behave differently, but different parts of the world, different parts of the world and different governments started responding differently. And whether it's the Saudi Arabians or the Russians or whatever, and all of these things have an impact on worldwide energy consumption and demand. And certainly in Canada, we were really interested to see what the United States would do in terms of blocking the borders as demand for shale gas started falling in 2020. For us, and the lessons of the last year and how we're positioned right now going forward, it's a little bit less in the immediate term about outright demand and supply. The real issue that we all have to confront is, during these shifts in demand and supply, are companies well positioned to absorb the shock? Because when those things shift, the volatility in the markets goes absolutely crazy. And we saw in April of last year, when you could get a barrel of crude oil in Cushing, Oklahoma, and you could get $36, both on the same day. And that's a consequence of extreme volatility in the market as a consequence of changes in demand and supply. So when we are looking at and thinking about the future and looking at how our business is well positioned, we think about, of course, what consumers are looking for. We're looking up the cost of what we're producing. We're looking at how we can do it in a more environmentally friendly way. But we're also looking at it from the point of view of how do we position ourselves so that as the world shifts, we're on the right side of volatility and we're on the right side of all of those cost curves. We're doing biofuels now at our Whitegate refinery in Ireland. And it's really interesting to watch because we thought there may be technology challenges. We thought there may be catalyst challenges. We thought there may be issues associated with the plant. But really what we found, and it was referenced earlier, is it's a supply chain issue. And we can't get enough used cooking oil to run through our refinery right now in Ireland, partly because of the pandemic, but partly because supply chains are not built to sustain it. And so we're looking at other forms of biomass that we can run at the refinery now, and we're testing a few other alternatives now so that we can actually take that refinery and we can do something different with it. We can move that refinery off oil and make it a biorefinery, but we need another source of hydrogen other than from crude oil. We are the largest producer and consumer of hydrogen in Ireland. And right now we get that from crude oil. So as we watch the different economies and we watch where this world is progressing, we want to be an early adapter of a lot of those technologies. We're the 10th within the top 10 consumers of hydrogen in Canada. And so in all of our infrastructures, as these technologies become real, we want to be early adapters to reduce costs, reduce environmental footprint, and actually be that proving ground so that we can then take it to consumers. It's a pretty interesting time.
And one of the really interesting inputs to this equation is vehicles and electrification across industries. But let's start with vehicles. And Stina, maybe I'll go to you. If we can talk about any topic within electrification of vehicles we want, but I was going to start with policy a little bit. You and I do have a home in Maine, but I'm also in California right now. And California, people often say, as goes California, so goes the rest of the nation. I'm sure that chafes for a lot of the rest of the nation, but from a policy perspective, particularly on environmental issues, it has often been true. And our governor recently mandated or is attempting to mandate that we will not have combustion vehicles sold on the road, light duty vehicles, by 2035. And that would obviously be transformational. Soon after, GM made an announcement saying that they were going to support that through their actions of product development and no longer offer them in that time frame. And now there seems to be a race going on around the world and even around the states to say, let's do it even sooner. Let's do it even sooner. So, Stina, the first question for you, right in the center of it all, how real do you think that is, or how achievable do you think it is? And what do you think stands in the way of that happening?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So as you said, my work has been in distributed energy technologies, batteries, small scale renewables, and really on the software side to figure out how we can coordinate with those resources, make sure that they are good participants on the grid, and that they can provide value to their communities and also to the sites where they're located. So I think, again, coming at it from an engineering standpoint, I have felt for a while that we have most of the tools we need on the technology side to do all the things we want to do in the energy future. And so I think, a lot of it is we do need people pushing from all different angles to try to make these things happen. So I really appreciate what California is doing to try to take the technologies that we have today and let's put them out there and get people adopting them and find out if there are issues and let's fix those issues. We kind of got to get in there and do that. I've seen battery systems go from the lab to homes, and there's a big difference in what happens at someone's home versus what happens in the lab. So you really kind of got to get that stuff out there. And then my focus at Proterra, where I'm at now, looking at large scale fleets of electric vehicles, is really on the software side and the energy services side. If we are going to accelerate adoption of electric vehicles, we have to make sure that those resources play nice with the grid. So you can't just put 1,000 buses in one location and expect to charge those all at the same time and have no problems. Catherine's smiling and nodding. I'm sure you have the same opinions on it. So my focus is on how can we enable customers to be successful with those electric vehicles so that, you know, their number one focus is to have a vehicle that will be ready to go when they need it. But then at the same time, if we are going to have a future where all of these distributed resources, you know, work together and work with the grid of the future, we need to have that flexibility and the ability to communicate with those resources and have them, you know, work in a way that works for the whole system.
So it's doable, but it needs to be coordinated beyond just the unit itself, but with the entire system.
That's right. Yeah, that's my view.
Okay. Catherine, you run that system. So tell us what your view and what the company's view is on EVs broadly. Like, how is this really going to happen this quickly, or the crazy Californians up to whatever? And how do you see, is it a net positive for the business? How do you see it adapting to it?
Well, so I think EVs are here. You know, we're seeing from customers that the demand is there. But the infrastructure and the charging infrastructure is key to the ultimate deployment. Now, let's just throw a number out there. If we transition over to 250 million electric vehicles, that's going to reduce the barrels of oil that Ian was talking about. It's going to reduce 17.6 million barrels of oil a day removed from the kind of supply chain that we're doing. But we also know that when those cars charge and those buses and those fleet vehicles charge is critical, because if you're driving your personal vehicle out and about during the day and you come home after work and you plug it in and suddenly everybody's plugging in their cars to recharge them at the end of the day, that's going to increase our peak load demand by 4 to 10%. Now let's make it more complicated, right? So let's say that you really want renewable power and you like solar. Well, the sun shines, we all know, say in Maine on a winter day, that sun is coming up at 9:30 in the morning and it's setting by 3:30. You're not getting the sun and the power from your renewable power when you're charging your car late at night. But we also know that that charging of the vehicle can also create battery power that can be used to supplement the grid. And so there are all these complexities of how to adjust when people charge, how to use the car battery as another resource that can power the grid during certain times. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity here, but what we really do need to do is, you know, I'll reiterate what Stina and what you said, Andrew, it's the coordination, right? So what one of our goals is we call make ready. It's making the grid ready, being able to see where we've got underutilized circuits, and we could say we can build more capacity on that to build, you know, high speed chargers. And we lay that over with the transportation infrastructure. And we could plan on how to get the high speed chargers in the right places to get customers the battery charge that they want and do it in an efficient way, because we're planning the grid upgrades compared to what we know we already need and where the infrastructure needs to be built out. So with that kind of coordination, I think that there are a tremendous amount of opportunities.
Okay, so Stina says it's totally possible. It's awesome, just needs coordination. Catherine says, can't wait. We love to build out assets and we're going to harden this thing and make it all sing. I know what Scott's going to say. So Ian, I'm going to go to you first. What does it mean for you? And is this a thing? Like, are these numbers real? Explosive growth. McKinsey says every vehicle, blah, blah, blah. What does it really mean for Irving?
You know, it's an interesting question, and I don't think any of us on this conversation or listening are going to actually be able to predict when things are going to happen, but that they will happen or that they won't happen. I think we can predict that, and I think the change is inevitable. 84% of the fast chargers that aren't in people's homes in Atlantic Canada are in our retail locations in Atlantic Canada. When you think about moving and adapting and being innovative, you have to actually think outside of the box, and that's not an outside of the box thinking. You actually have to do what your consumers demand. And so we have all of the fast chargers at our retail locations, and we're putting them in New England now. And then we're hoping to continue to drive the traffic through our locations, whether it's our restaurants or the other services that we offer, because you know what? Part of our plan is to increase that share of wallet for the non-petroleum products that are at our retail sites. And so as we think about all of the things that are going on, we think that oil will be around for many years to come. We think that as gasoline demand falls away, which it inevitably will, we want to be on the right side of that cost curve, but it is happening. As a reference point, I just thought I'd call this out today. It used to be like gasoline was the product. And in our business, wow, you've made margin on gasoline. Today, you make about $5 a barrel on gasoline and you pay the RIN, so you make maybe $1 on gasoline. And you make $13 on asphalt. So, and that used to be kind of the product that nobody wanted to have. And so as different economies change, pardon me?
Well, what does your product pie look like today? So, but not just margin, but sort of how much is gasoline and how much are you moving toward other refined products?
It's interesting because we have to be very deliberate in how we move, and not all crudes produce the same yield of refined products. So it's really a function of the hardware you have. It's a function of the crude oils you can buy and the catalysts and technologies that you have within your infrastructure. We can adjust up and down a little bit, but what we have to do probably at the end of the day is find an alternate use for the gasoline barrel that is going to become a bit of a byproduct, if you will, out of our total crude oil yield. So it's an interesting problem that we're having right now as we think about the future. Europe is having that problem now. There's a tremendous amount of gasoline coming into Boston and New York Harbor right now. That's a byproduct of the refineries in Europe. And that depressed price that we see right now is a function of how gasoline is moving along the Atlantic Basin. So that will be the first issue that we have to contend with. And it's one we're working on really hard now.
Scott, I want you to close us out on the EV topic unless other people have things to add, but I'm gonna I love the Bill Gates quote. We always overestimate what we can do in 2 years and underestimate what we can do in 10. I remember the EV1 from GM, right? It's taken a while, but now, you know, I have a Model 3 Tesla. It's the best vehicle I've ever owned by far. I haven't a lot of fancy cars, but it is truly just a superior product, especially on a dollar basis. It's just a better product. So Scott, you were at McKinsey for a long time. I'm sure that allowed you to never not be one to prognosticate about the future. So take us into the future section and tell us what your timing is for that EV transition. And let's call it the sort of tipping point stage, where if we're at 1 or 2 or 3% in the US today, when are we at 20%, 25% of new vehicles sold?
Well, it's an interesting question what units you're talking about. New vehicles sold is going to happen a lot sooner than the percentage of the fleet, right? Or the actual, percentage of the cars we see on the roads. And this is the sticky wicket, as the Brits would say, when it comes to transportation, fuel switching, or climate, mitigation. We run the risk often in panels like this of painting with a very broad brush, and we can talk about, oh, well, we won't transform the entire 300 million vehicle fleet in the United States until we actually have public charging everywhere. That's not the point. Okay, that's not the point. It takes 15 years for a vehicle that is placed on the road today to get off the road. 15 years. And we sell 17 million vehicles in the United States a year. Do the math. It will be a very, very, very long time, unfortunately, even if every single vehicle sold today were electric, for us to get those gas-fueled vehicles off the roads. And by the way, after they leave the United States, unfortunately, they go to Mexico and other countries where new vehicles are less affordable.
So what's your plan?
Well, so part of the point that I'm trying to make is that we have to really look at the numbers and deal with the facts. Transportation fuel is not going to switch as quick as what we'll see in the electricity sector decarbonizing. We've already seen for the last 10 years, 50% of new electricity generation go the way of renewable over the last 10 years. We still don't have a ton of renewable electricity because, again, we have a stock problem, right? The existing stock, the existing capital stock that provides our electricity has been built over the last 100 years. And it takes a while to take things offline. The plan is one where we actually just need to start listening to customers better. If you actually listen to customers, like you were just as a reference for Tesla, Andrew, it's the better car. It's the best car you've ever had. And actually, there were several cars that came out from Tesla that Consumer Reports have called, at the times of their market entry, the greatest car ever made. And that is what has allowed consumers to choose those Teslas instead of Toyotas or BMWs or Volkswagens. And now the industry is finally responding and actually delivering consumers some choices that they want besides the Tesla. It's going to take a long time. This is not the decade where we're going to be like, all of a sudden in 2025, every car is electric. It will be well into the 2030s that we feel like a lot of the cars we see, or most of the cars that we see, are going to be electric. But that doesn't mean we are going to lose all hope at addressing climate change and catastrophic effects of climate change. These are two big parts of the problem: electricity and transportation. Unfortunately, the problem is even bigger than those two difficult but big problems. We have to deal with a lot of other things in order to deal with climate change, water scarcity, food insecurity, and other issues that I know a number of us care about.
Well, all right, so we're going to go into the future now. Now we're going to just look ahead a little bit more. I have to read one of the questions that's come in. We've got a bunch of great questions already, but one of them I think will set this up well, and we can address the question or the topic that I want to cover. And the question was: there seems to be a reticence to making big investments now toward combating climate change due to a faith in technology development that someday somehow will save us. And do you see this faith in the technology as a risk to our success in combating climate change? And so I'll start, we can answer that and also ask the question, this is jump ball, wonderful sort of big elephant, green elephant in the room here, about climate change. How much time do we have? How much time do we have in years to really tackle climate change and reverse the clock? So jump ball, anyone is welcome to dive in or talk about a concern for an undying faith in technology that will just save us at some point somehow.
We need to deploy what we have today. There is absolutely no two ways about it if you look at the time scale that all the scientists have agreed we are on, which is we need to bend the emissions curve globally dramatically by the end of this decade by getting to a zero carbon sort of situation within a couple of decades. And that means that we have to replace that entire stock that I talked about in electricity. It means we have to replace that entire stock of vehicles on the roads. And it means we have to stop wasting so much stuff, whether it's electricity or food or other things that we are producing and not using enough to actually address this problem. It is a 10-year window, according to the United Nations. By 2030, we have to have definitively changed our course.
Okay.
That means
what's your take? What's our time frame?
So I'll add this, maybe a little bit differently, which is to say that, I agree with Scott that we need to deploy technologies that we have right now. We shouldn't be waiting. And I think that there's a tremendous amount that we can do. We talked a little bit about the decarbonation of the electric generation fleet. We can get to substantial decarbonation by 2030, 2035. To make it to the next level, to go 100% decarbonation, that's where we need technology, and we need new technologies, that are affordable. So I like to think that we are pushing technology. We are converting to a lot of those new technologies right now, but I still think that there's going to require more research, more innovation in order to get us that last mile.
Okay, Ian?
Yeah, and I'll just add a comment around all of this, which is change is hard. And there is a lot of invested technology now that we have to evolve from, and there's a lot of new technology that needs further development. I don't think it's a one answer. I don't think there's one answer to that question. I think that existing technologies have got to get better as a bridge, and new technologies have got to be developed and implemented rapidly. And to the question about how much time we have, I think the answer is not as much as we think we do. And I think we have to do everything with urgency. And the way you do things with urgency, or one way to do things with urgency from my perspective, is to actually don't wait until you've got it 100% figured out. Start small, do your pilots, get things going, be innovative, and then move it out at scale with as many great partners as you can find. And if that's your approach, then we can actually try many different things and get them implemented and be really, really successful going forward.
Love it. That resonates with one of the comments we just got in the chat of why wait? Let's fast forward to address the problem at 100x speed right now. Stina, did you want to add anything on that?
The only thing I might add is, so Berkeley came out with a report last year that's at 2035report.com, where it lays out how we can get to 100% carbon free by 2035 with existing technologies, the way that Scott mentioned. So people could check that out. And I also, Catherine, what you mentioned with consumers, I think consumers have a lot of power. If people ask for things from their providers, it will more likely happen. So if you talk to your utility, tell them what you need. Abby Hopper, who's the CEO of the Solar Energy Industry Association, mentioned today about how much power corporations have, for example, and big customers when they're looking for a particular energy mix for locating, their facilities. So I think people have more power than they think, and we can, if we all act, that will help move us forward. And to Ian's point, there's no silver bullet, so we got everything. Throw everything at it. That's what we got to do.
All right. So
perfect.
Yeah, go ahead.
I got to touch one thing, which is going to cover a couple questions, right? Which is policy change, right? We have got to get faster permitting approvals for things like transmission lines to bring renewables to us. We've got to get faster and better permitting on things like modular nuclear if we're really going to have a baseload generation, clean generation. So we've got to work on the policy angle, not just the technology angle.
Catherine, I just want to add to that, and I want to agree with you, because where we are now, and say hydrogen or whatever it may be, an organization like yours, like mine, like all of ours, we can invest in these things. But then if the policies come later, and all of a sudden the things that we're investing in, all of a sudden the rules change, and the rules of the game change, and the things that we're doing get constrained or be redefined, it's going to be really problematic. So one of the real enablers that we all have as a responsibility, everyone in the conference, is to push for that policy change proactively to move at the same pace that we're talking about on this call.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point, Ian. And I think we're seeing it also with the oil industry more broadly, talking about carbon, putting a price on carbon and other things. I have seen a shift in the last 10 years, even in the last 5, for industry to say, we're ready to move, we're serious about it, but we want to do it hand in hand with regulators, because we don't want to have a new favorite technology be picked in 5 years after we've made a bet over here. But that's quite different than what was happening for a lot of people 10 years ago, where there was more resistance and an anti-regulatory behavior. So I think that's a big sweeping change that's taken place. Now we're going to go to the lightning round, where, just to set the rules again here, I'm going to name a technology, because even though technology does not save us all from ourselves, it will, I think we agree, play a role in our future. Some may and some may not. If we're talking about that climate clock that, as Ian said, is as fast as possible to affect the change, but as Stina and Scott were saying, is a 10-year to get down by half. Somebody mentioned this in the chat. And then 40 to get down half again, and then 0 by 2050. If that's our timeline, which of these technologies can play the biggest role and thus should deserve both our investment, but also, say, students who are interested in entering into a field, where could they affect the most change? So your options are thumbs up, thumbs down because it's not going to meet that timeline, or you just think it's crazy. And if you're sort of wavering, I mean, maybe you could go halfway, but we might as well just be all in. And I'm going to mention some of the stuff that came up from all of you, but also in the chat. So small modular nuclear. Scott, okay, all right. The distributed generation people are wavering a little bit. Okay, cold fusion. Oh, okay, interesting. Geothermal, large-scale geothermal. Okay, that's our first consensus thumbs up. Offshore wind, I already know where one of you is on this. Okay, we're all there, that was easy. Electric aviation. Ask me afterward, I've got a great company. Okay, and then green hydrogen, parentheses, whatever that means. Okay, interpret as you will. I'm gonna go negative on that. Okay, we have time for a couple of questions. So why don't we focus on some, well, oh, sorry, one more. At source carbon capture and sequestration. Okay, direct air capture, defined as actually sucking air out of the atmosphere and then removing the CO2 from it, not at the source. Okay, interesting. All right. I wish we had a lot more time. The green hydrogen economy has come up a lot in the chat. And so maybe jump ball, does anybody want to comment on really what green hydrogen means, what the hydrogen economy means? I mean, Irving's been in the hydrogen economy for a long time, but Catherine, maybe you could kick us off here.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts on green hydrogen. The first is generation, and the second is like local distribution usage when you think about natural gas. So can green hydrogen be mixed with regular natural gas in order to decarbonize some of your local distribution natural gas? Because we know customers love having gas in their houses and cooking and things like that. So how can we potentially decarbonize some of that with still providing some of the benefits that customers like about having natural gas? But the second thing that I think is more interesting is the more power generation. And so I think already we know that you can manufacture hydrogen localized with, like a large ammonium manufacturer. They can have a hydrogen electrolyzer on site. Those are for kind of uses on an industrial basis, which I think is interesting. But I think what really would get interesting is if you can combine, when they really call about green hydrogen, it's talking about using, say, wind power or solar power on off-peak hours, that excess energy, using it to build an electrolyzer to build your hydrogen, which could then potentially power a peaker, a traditional combustion engine. And that could provide that bridge, that variability that we get in our renewable power, so that when the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining, you can get your power source from the green hydrogen that's been created by that excess renewable power.
So green hydrogen as a battery, basically at a larger scale. And are you all investing? Are you investing in that technology?
We are, and to Ian's point, we're looking to do pilots. So we're looking to pilot some of these projects. I'd love to see something combined with one of our offshore wind sites, electrolyzer on land when you've got the offshore power. So we're working on it. Okay.
Ian?
Probably the best example that I'm aware of in the green hydrogen that's working right now, or there's a pilot starting now, and I'm not familiar with yours, Catherine, so apologies for that. But Hydro-Quebec is using their power from their dams, and they're constructing a 11.1 megawatt green hydrogen facility that they're going to use it as a feeder to a biomass facility. The cost of that right now, of that 11.1 megawatts, is about $160 million. And so it's an interesting technology. It's a technology that's there. It's building out in Europe, and it's starting, of course, in North America. But the price point associated with it has got to be improved. And that's where advances in the technology and investments and getting all of these bright people and thinking and motivation from government will come into play. Because I think that as soon as that technology makes the next leap or two, so that it can actually become more cost effective, then many, many other industrial businesses certainly will use that as a transformative technology.
Scott, you must be financing some green hydrogen stuff somewhere.
Well, we're actually the largest owner of hydrogen-powered vehicles, I think, in North America, and we've been doing it for years. And Walmart and the U.S. Postal Service and some other big organizations rely upon hydrogen fuel cells for the forklifts that are in their distribution centers. We all depend upon every single day, especially in a pandemic. So we've done several $100 million worth of these hydrogen-powered vehicles. They could be green hydrogen or brown hydrogen powered. We obviously would prefer that they be green hydrogen powered. The reality is the technology is available today, and it works, and it's been working every single day, every hour of every day for Walmart and the U.S. Postal Service through the pandemic. So let's just remember there are a lot of technologies you haven't read about that are working, and that are working better than the alternative, which is why the customers have chosen them. Right? It's not to feel better about themselves. It's to provide value that they need that they can't get from somewhere else. And it's usually because it's cheaper.
And I think I saw some thumbs up around nuclear. Was that correct? Did you have a view there?
I think the small stuff could be interesting, but it's not an area I've dug into too much. I was going to ask if you've seen hydrogen come up in the aviation space. Is that
I have.
happening?
We also got a question about aviation, which gives me an excuse to brag about a great company that we invested in called Lilium, which is, you can see incredible flights of a small vehicle at lilium.com. That's my advertisement. But broadly speaking, there's maybe three categories: electric drone flight, which is really just sort of helicopter lift, very difficult to do because of the energy intensity needed to move things around. So I don't think it's great for humans. There is short haul flight, which is what Lilium and Joby Aviation and others are trying to do, which usually use fixed wings in combination with some vertical lift. We use vector thrust jets, but Joby uses propellers that then tilt and turn into flight. And then there's long haul flight. And so that short haul, I think, can work for humans, and there are a bunch of great companies working really hard on it. Very, very exciting because it's so much less expensive, because the amount of energy used is very low and you don't have fuel infrastructure in the way that you do for aviation today. There's then people working on long haul flight, and that's a place where I'm not a huge fan of a lot of hydrogen powering forklifts or other things. I think that there's better uses with batteries on the ground, but long haul flight and long haul marine and other things are really going to be challenged by batteries, but hydrogen could play a huge role there. There's a really interesting startup called Universal Hydrogen working on long haul flights with hydrogen and fuel cells as the tool. Ian, did you want to add something there?
Look, I'm fine. I think that there is a lot of potential in hydrogen, and I see it in the same way that you see it, Andrew, in terms of shipping and heavy infrastructure. And everything has got to be right sized. There's a place for batteries and battery technology, and there's a place that needs a heavier answer. And I think as we look at all the different alternatives that are out there in industry, in marine, in other types of heavy use, hydrogen does have a use going forward.
Well, we have to wrap up, but this has been an unbelievably fascinating discussion. I think we could probably talk for hours about it, because in ways that I really feel like we haven't seen in decades, the amount of innovation going on across the energy landscape is profound. It's impacting every corner of the economy, every corner of the globe, and every corner of our daily lives. A couple of takeaways for me, the all of the above strategy as we think about tools to fight climate change was resonating for me, the strong desire to engage on policy, and then also the recognition that a lot of the tool sets that we need to make this change already exist today, and we've just got to put them to work. So while miracles will be helpful to get us into the future, we could probably get there with just what we've got and a lot of the great people that are coming up in the industry today. So thank you all very much for joining us, and thank you for all the great questions. We got to a lot of them from the audience. Really appreciate it.